It is late in his life. An old man sits quietly in a stone room, watching the light move across the wall. Outside, the world continues its noise. Courts, kings, wars, ambitions. But here there is only silence, paper, and thought. This man is Leonardo da Vinci. He has been called a genius, a master, a visionary. But those names come later. In this story, he is first and foremost a watcher of water, of birds, of faces, of time itself. Tonight we will follow his life not as a list of achievements, but as a quiet journey of attention. From the hills of a small Tuscan village to the great cities of the Renaissance, from unfinished paintings to notebooks filled with questions, from restless curiosity to calm reflection. So settle in now, let the pace slow, and allow this story to unfold gently. This is the life of Leonardo da Vinci, a calm, bedtime documentary. In the final years of his life, Leonardo da Vinci lived quietly, far from the cities that had once demanded his attention. The noise of Florence and Milan was gone. The arguments of patrons, the pressure of deadlines, the endless expectations, all of it had faded into memory. He lived now in France, in a small residence near the Loire, surrounded by soft hills and slow-moving water. His body was weaker. His right hand no longer obeyed him as it once had, but his mind remained awake. Leonardo spent long hours sitting still, watching light travel across stone walls. He observed how shadows softened as the sun lowered, how dust floated in the air, how silence was never truly empty. Even at the end of his life, he was still doing what he had always done best, paying attention. To the outside world, Leonardo was already becoming a legend. Courts spoke of him as a master. Artists admired him as an unreachable standard. Kings treated him as a treasure. But here, in this quiet room, he was not a genius or a symbol. He was an old man surrounded by notebooks, sketches, and unfinished thoughts. Pages filled with drawings of storms, mussels, plants, machines, and questions that had never found final answers. Leonardo did not fear unfinished things. Incompleteness had always been part of his life. Ideas interested him more than conclusions. Questions mattered more than answers. As evening approached, the light grew warmer. It revealed the uneven texture of the walls, the slight tremor in his hands, the thin lines on his face shaped by years of observation. This was a face that had learned patience. Not the patience of waiting, but the patience of looking. He had spent a lifetime watching the world closely, and the world, in return, had never fully made sense to him. Nature fascinated him not because it was beautiful, but because it was precise. Water flowed according to laws. Birds flew not by magic, but by structure. The human body moved like a complex system of levers, muscles, and breath. Leonardo believed that nothing existed without reason, even if that reason remained hidden. And yet, for all his knowledge, he never claimed certainty. The more he learned, the more the world seemed vast, layered, and unresolved. Understanding, he discovered, did not bring control. It brought humility. As night settled, he turned the pages of an old notebook. The handwriting was reversed, written from right to left, as it had always been. A habit, a shield, a way of thinking inward rather than outward. There were drawings he barely remembered making. A spiral of water, a wing shaped like a bird's, a human heart opened carefully, respectfully. Each page was a moment of attention preserved in ink, not declarations, not answers, only attempts to see clearly. Leonardo had lived among powerful men, dukes, generals, kings, yet power itself never truly interested him. He served it when he had to. He observed it when he could. But his loyalty belonged elsewhere. It belonged to curiosity. Curiosity had guided him from childhood fields to royal courts. It had pulled him toward art, science, anatomy, engineering, and dreams of flight. It had kept him restless, often dissatisfied, frequently misunderstood. Now, In the stillness of his final years, curiosity softened into contemplation. There was less urgency, but no less wonder. Leonardo understood something few of his time had grasped, that life was not meant to be mastered, only studied, only witnessed. As the light finally disappeared and the room grew dim, he closed the notebook, not because the questions were finished, but because the day was. Outside, the world continued its motion. Inside, a mind that had spent a lifetime watching prepared at last to rest. This is where our story begins. Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452 in a small Tuscan village called Vinci. It was not a place of power or prestige. There were no great walls, no famous schools, no grand expectations, only hills, olive trees, narrow paths, and the steady rhythm of rural life. From the very beginning, Leonardo existed slightly outside the map of importance. He was born out of wedlock, the son of a respected notary and a peasant woman. In the rigid social world of Renaissance Italy, this fact quietly shaped his future. Certain professions were closed to him, certain paths were unavailable. He would not inherit a name in the traditional sense, nor a clearly defined place in society. Yet this distance from convention also spared him from many of the pressures placed upon legitimate heirs. Leonardo did not grow up confined by strict academic schedules or early professional training. He lived between households, between town and countryside, between social classes. This in-between state became his natural position in the world. He learned early to observe rather than to belong, to watch rather than to claim. Much of his childhood unfolded outdoors. The Tuscan landscape became his first and most faithful teacher. He followed the movement of water through soil and stone, noticed how plants bent toward the sun, and studied the quiet precision with which insects and birds moved through their environments. Nature did not speak in words, but Leonardo learned its language all the same. While other children memorized rules, Leonardo absorbed patterns. He sensed that nothing in the natural world was accidental. Everything followed structure, balance, and cause. Water flowed the way it did for a reason. Leaves grew as they did for a reason. Wings carried bodies into the air not by miracle, but by design. This way of learning, slow, attentive, unforced, would remain with him for life. He did not rush toward mastery. He lingered in curiosity. The world to him was not something to be conquered, but something to be carefully studied, piece by piece. In growing up outside the map of privilege, Leonardo developed a habit that would define him forever. He learned to look closely, and in looking closely, he began to see what others overlooked. Long before Leonardo encountered books, workshops, or teachers, he learned from the world around him. His earliest education did not arrive through language or instruction, but through quiet attention. The countryside surrounding Vinci offered no formal lessons, yet it presented something far more enduring, a living system in constant motion. As a child, Leonardo wandered freely through fields, along streams and into wooded hills. He watched water gather after rain, tracing its paths as it slipped through soil and stone. He noticed how it slowed, how it rushed, how it changed shape without ever losing its nature. These movements stayed with him, settling into his mind long before he knew how to describe them. Plants, too, became subjects of study. Leonardo observed how stems curved toward the light, how leaves arranged themselves in patterns, how roots anchored life below the surface while growth reached upward. Nothing seemed arbitrary. Each form suggested intention, each motion acquired logic. Nature, he sensed, was governed by laws, invisible, patient, and precise. Animals revealed another layer of understanding. Birds fascinated him most. He followed their flight with his eyes, noting how wings tilted, how air seemed to carry weight, how balance was constantly adjusted in motion. He did not see flight as mystery or magic. He saw it as structure, as something that could be understood and perhaps one day imitated. Insects, often ignored by others, held his attention just as firmly. He studied the way they moved in relation to their environment, how their bodies were shaped perfectly for their tasks. Even in the smallest creatures, Leonardo recognized complexity. Nothing, he believed, was too insignificant to be worthy of study. This education was silent, but it was thorough. It taught him patience above all else. Nature did not reveal its patterns quickly. It demanded time, repetition, and humility. Leonardo learned to wait. He learned that understanding arrived not through force, but through sustained observation. Unlike formal schooling, nature did not reward certainty. It encouraged doubt. Every answer led to another question. Every pattern hinted at deeper structures. Leonardo grew comfortable with not knowing. In fact, he came to value uncertainty as a necessary part of learning. This way of seeing shaped his relationship with the world. He did not separate art from science, or beauty from function. A leaf was both elegant and efficient. A bird's wing was both graceful and mechanical. Form and purpose were inseparable. As the years passed, this silent education became the foundation of everything Leonardo would later attempt. His drawings, his inventions, his studies of anatomy and motion, all of them carried the imprint of those early days spent watching water flow and birds rise into the air. Nature had not taught him what to think, it had taught him how to look. And in learning how to look, Leonardo began a lifelong journey of understanding the world not as it was described, but as it truly appeared when given time and attention. As Leonardo grew older, observation began to seek an outlet. Watching the world was no longer enough. What he saw demanded to be captured, preserved, and studied again. And so, almost instinctively, his hand began to draw. He drew wherever he could, on scraps of paper, on the margins of books, on whatever surface was available. Lines appeared not as decoration, but as attempts to understand form, a curve of a leaf, the angle of a bird's wing, the tension in a human hand. Drawing became a way of thinking, a method for slowing the world down long enough to examine it. Leonardo's hand rarely rested. When his eyes encountered something unfamiliar or striking, his fingers followed. This was not the discipline of a trained artist, but the urgency of a mind afraid of forgetting. The world changed constantly, and drawing offered a way to hold a moment still. There was no separation between seeing and doing. His sketches were not performances meant for admiration. They were private conversations between eye and hand. Mistakes were welcomed. Corrections appeared openly. Lines overlapped, erased themselves, returned stronger. Each page revealed a mind in motion. Even as a boy, Leonardo showed little interest in copying what others had already mastered. Repetition bored him. What fascinated him was variation, how the same form could shift slightly under different conditions. A face seen from another angle, a body in motion rather than at rest, a plant at dawn instead of midday. These subtle changes mattered deeply to him. Drawing taught Leonardo another essential lesson: patience with imperfection. No line ever felt final. Every image could be refined, reconsidered, approached again from another direction. Completion was less important than understanding. This attitude would follow him throughout his life, shaping both his brilliance and his frustration. Those around him began to notice his talent. There was a quiet intensity in the way he worked, a focus that made time seem irrelevant. While others paused, rested, or moved on, Leonardo remained absorbed, pursuing form with unwavering attention. His hand moved as if guided by curiosity rather than effort. Yet even then, his drawings hinted at something beyond art. Muscles were studied not for beauty alone, but for function. Faces were not merely expressive, but structural. The world in his pages was reduced to systems, joints, forces, rhythms, all interacting in delicate balance. In time, this restless hand would lead him toward workshops, masters, and cities of ambition. But its true origin lay here, in the quiet persistence of a child unwilling to let the world pass unseen. For Leonardo, drawing was never a skill to be perfected. It was a necessity, a way of staying connected to the endless complexity unfolding before him. And so, with charcoal and ink, the lifelong habit was formed. The hand that would not rest had found its purpose. When Leonardo arrived in Florence, he entered a world unlike anything he had known before. The quiet rhythms of the countryside were replaced by noise, ambition, and constant movement. Florence in the late 15th century was not simply a city. It was a living argument about beauty, power, and the nature of human potential. Stone buildings rose like declarations. Workshops spilled into the streets. Art was not decoration here, it was competition. For a young man shaped by silence and observation, the city was overwhelming. Everywhere Leonardo looked, there was evidence of human confidence. Sculptures stood in public squares, as if challenging the sky. Painters argued over technique and theory. Wealthy families commissioned works not only to honor God, but to assert dominance and taste. Florence demanded excellence, and it demanded it loudly. Leonardo entered the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the city's most respected masters. It was a place of discipline and hierarchy, where apprentices learned by repetition and correction. Here, art was labor. Pigments were ground, panels prepared, metals shaped. Talent alone was not enough. Endurance mattered just as much. At first, Leonardo worked like any other apprentice. He learned the rules, he copied forms, he practiced proportions, yet it quickly became clear that he was not satisfied with imitation. While others focused on surface accuracy, Leonardo looked beneath appearances. He wanted to know why a body moved as it did, why light softened one edge and sharpened another, why a face appeared alive only when certain details were restrained. Florence exposed him to the full force of Renaissance thought. Classical ideas about harmony and proportion circulated alongside new experiments in perspective and anatomy. The human figure became a central obsession, not as a symbol, but as a structure governed by balance and mechanics. Leonardo absorbed these ideas quietly, filtering them through his own habits of observation. It was here that his difference became more pronounced. Leonardo did not work quickly. He paused often. He revised endlessly. Where others aimed for completion, he lingered in possibility. This made him difficult to categorize. Some admired his brilliance. Others found him frustrating, even unreliable. Florence valued results, and Leonardo valued understanding, yet moments of recognition arrived all the same. In Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo was entrusted with increasingly complex tasks. According to later accounts, when he painted an angel in one of Verrocchio's works, the figure appeared so alive that it surpassed the master's own hand. Whether legend or truth, the story reflects something real. Leonardo's ability to infuse stillness with presence. Florence also sharpened his awareness of competition. Genius was not rare here. It was contested. Talent existed everywhere, and survival depended on distinction. This environment both energized and unsettled Leonardo. He was inspired by the skill surrounding him, yet resistant to the urgency that drove others. He did not want to race. He wanted to see. Beyond the workshop, the city itself became another subject of study. Leonardo observed crowds as carefully as landscapes. He noted how people moved together, how expressions shifted in conversation, how emotion traveled through posture rather than words. Human behavior, he realized, followed patterns just as nature did. At night, he returned to his notebooks. The pages filled faster now. Architectural studies appeared beside sketches of faces. Mechanical ideas shared space with studies of drapery. Florence did not narrow his focus. It expanded it. The city overwhelmed him with possibilities, and his mind responded by trying to hold everything at once. This period marked a turning point. Leonardo was no longer simply a gifted youth. He had encountered a city that mirrored his own intensity, and the encounter changed him. Florence taught him what human ambition looked like at its highest concentration. It showed him what was possible, and what it cost. In the midst of brilliance and rivalry, Leonardo began to understand that his path would never be simple. He would not fit easily into systems built on speed and certainty. His genius was slow, layered, and deeply inward. Florence revealed this truth to him not through comfort, but through contrast. The city shocked him awake, and from that shock, a new phase of his life quietly began. Within the walls of Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo learned what it meant to work among others. Apprentices shared space, tools, and instruction, each moving toward mastery along a path already well defined. Tasks were assigned, methods were repeated, progress was measured in completed pieces and visible improvement. For most, this structure offered clarity. For Leonardo, it revealed difference. He followed instructions carefully, yet his attention often drifted beyond them. While others focused on reproducing a form accurately, Leonardo questioned the form itself. Why did a shoulder turn that way? How did tension travel through the arm? What caused a face to appear alive in one moment and empty in the next? These were not questions the workshop could easily answer. Leonardo's habit of looking deeply made him unusual. He spent long hours studying small details that others considered finished. A fold of cloth, the shadow beneath a chin, the subtle shift in expression when a figure turned slightly away from the light. He was not slow because he lacked skill. He was slow because he refused to accept surface understanding. This depth sometimes created distance. Fellow apprentices moved ahead, completing commissions and earning recognition. Leonardo lingered, revising, reconsidering, often dissatisfied. To some, this appeared as hesitation, to others, as arrogance. But to Leonardo, it was necessity. He could not move on until something made sense. Verrocchio, an experienced master, recognized both the promise and the challenge in his student. Leonardo possessed exceptional talent, but he resisted containment. He treated every assignment as an opportunity to investigate larger questions. Painting became inseparable from anatomy. Sculpture led to mechanical curiosity. No discipline remained isolated for long. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal a mind stretching outward. Studies of muscles appear beside sketches of machines. Faces dissolve into structural diagrams. Even simple workshop exercises became entry points into broader inquiry. He was not preparing to become only a painter. He was becoming something less definable. At times, this approach placed him at odds with expectations. Patrons wanted certainty, timelines, completion. Leonardo offered exploration, delay, and constant refinement. The workshop taught him how art functioned within society, as product, as status, as transaction. It also taught him how poorly his temperament aligned with such demands. Yet his depth of vision could not be ignored. When Leonardo worked, the results carried a quiet intensity. Figures seemed to breathe, light softened forms rather than flattening them. There was restraint in his hand, an understanding that less could reveal more. These qualities distinguished him, even as they complicated his progress. Florence had sharpened his skills, but it had also clarified his difference. Leonardo was not content to master a single craft. He was driven by an urge to connect everything he saw, to trace invisible relationships between structure, motion, and life itself. By looking too deeply, he set himself apart. The path ahead would not be smooth or direct, but it would be unmistakably his. As Leonardo's reputation slowly grew, so did a pattern that would follow him throughout his life. He began many works, but completed far fewer than expected. Paintings remained in progress for years. Commissions advanced, stalled, and sometimes dissolved entirely. To patrons and contemporaries, this habit was puzzling, even troubling. To Leonardo, it was unavoidable. He did not experience ideas as fixed destinations. Each project opened into new questions, and those questions demanded attention. A painting led him toward anatomy, Anatomy led him toward mechanics. Mechanics led him toward nature. The original task rarely survived unchanged. Completion felt less important than understanding the deeper structure beneath appearances. Leonardo's mind resisted finality. The moment something seemed resolved, it lost its urgency. What interested him was the threshold, the space where form was still becoming, where possibility remained open. This made him restless in a world that valued certainty and results. Unfinished works were not abandoned out of carelessness. They were paused in respect. Leonardo could not bring himself to close a door on an idea that still felt alive. To finish too soon would have meant simplifying something that deserved patience. This tendency shaped both his brilliance and his difficulties. Patrons grew impatient, promises stretched thin. Leonardo learned, often painfully, that society did not share his tolerance for incompletion, yet he did not alter his nature. Instead, he adapted quietly, moving from city to city, from project to project, carrying his questions with him. His notebooks offer insight into this unfinished mind. Pages rarely follow a linear order. Drawings interrupt text. Observations stand beside speculation. Nothing is organized for an audience. Everything exists for thought. The notebooks do not explain, they explore. Leonardo believed that true knowledge was always provisional. To understand something fully was to accept that it could still be understood differently tomorrow. Certainty, he felt, was a form of blindness. Doubt kept the mind awake. In a culture that celebrated masterpieces, Leonardo lived in process. He measured success not by completion, but by depth of inquiry. What he left unfinished was not evidence of failure, but of refusal, a refusal to reduce complexity into comfortable conclusions. The unfinished became his signature. It frustrated those who relied on him, but it also protected what mattered most to him: the freedom to think without closure, the space to continue looking. Leonardo did not seek to arrive. He sought to remain in motion. As Leonardo's art matured, something subtle began to change in the faces he painted. Expressions softened. Emotions became less explicit. Figures no longer announced themselves. Instead, they seemed to withhold something, as if caught between one thought and the next. Viewers sensed meaning but could not fully grasp it. Leonardo had learned that a face could reveal more by concealing. A fixed emotion felt false to him. Life, as he observed it, was never static. Feelings shifted continuously, shaped by memory, anticipation, and environment. To paint a single clear expression was to freeze something that was meant to move. He studied faces relentlessly, in markets, in churches, in quiet corners of the city. He watched people unaware of being observed. He noted how a smile could emerge almost imperceptibly, how it could fade before it fully formed. The smallest change in the mouth or eyes could alter the entire presence of a person. This sensitivity found its way into his work. Leonardo began to blur the boundaries between thought and feeling, between interior life and outward form. Shadows softened transitions, lines dissolved, light wrapped itself gently around features instead of defining them sharply. His figures appeared alive, not because they were detailed, but because they were unresolved. The famous smiles associated with Leonardo were never intended to explain themselves. They invited reflection rather than certainty. Viewers projected their own emotions into the space he left open. The paintings became mirrors, quietly responsive to whoever stood before them. This approach challenged expectations. Patrons often wanted clarity, saints clearly holy, rulers clearly powerful, narratives easily understood. Leonardo offered ambiguity. His works asked for time, patience, and attention. They did not reveal themselves quickly, yet this very restraint set him apart. His paintings seemed to breathe. They changed with light, mood, and distance. A figure might appear serene in one moment, distant in another. Leonardo understood that perception itself was unstable, and he embraced that instability. Behind this artistic choice lay his broader philosophy. Truth to Leonardo was rarely singular. It existed in layers. By refusing to explain everything, he honored the complexity of human experience. The smile that would not explain itself became a symbol of his way of seeing, attentive, gentle, and deeply aware of what could never be fully captured. In leaving space for uncertainty, Leonardo allowed his art to remain alive long after the moment of its creation. When Leonardo left Florence for Milan, the decision was not driven by artistic ambition alone. Florence had sharpened him, but it had also constrained him. The city demanded finished works, public recognition, and adherence to established roles. Milan, by contrast, offered something different: space to think, to design, to imagine beyond the boundaries of painting. Leonardo arrived at the court of Ludovico Sforza not as a painter, but as an engineer. In a carefully composed letter, he presented himself as a designer of bridges, canals, fortifications, and machines of war. Painting appeared almost as an afterthought. This was not modesty, it was strategy. Leonardo understood that Milan valued utility as much as beauty, and he positioned his mind accordingly. The city itself reflected this dual nature. Milan was less poetic than Florence, more practical, more concerned with power and infrastructure. Canals fed commerce, fortifications protected ambition. Leonardo found this environment stimulating. Here, ideas could be tested against reality. Concepts could be built, measured, and deployed. Leonardo's days filled with studies of mechanics and structure. He examined how forces moved through beams and arches, how weight could be distributed, how motion could be controlled. Machines fascinated him not as instruments of domination, but as expressions of natural principles. Gears, pulleys, and levers mirrored the mechanics he had observed in bodies and landscapes. To Leonardo, engineering was simply another language spoken by nature. At the same time, he was asked to design weapons. War was an unavoidable presence at court, and Leonardo approached it with a mixture of detachment and caution. He sketched cannons, armored vehicles, and defensive systems, yet his notebooks reveal an unease beneath the precision. He designed efficiently, but without enthusiasm. Destruction interested him far less than the mechanics that made it possible. Milan also deepened his engagement with architecture and urban planning. He envisioned cities shaped by hygiene, order, and flow, streets separated by function, water managed intelligently, human life organized to reduce suffering rather than amplify it. These ideas were far ahead of their time, and most remained on paper, yet they reveal the scope of his thinking. Despite his expanding responsibilities, Leonardo did not abandon art. In Milan, painting became slower, more deliberate. Works like The Last Supper demanded an integration of everything he had learned: anatomy, perspective, psychology, and structure. Each figure was positioned not only in space, but in emotional relation to the others. The composition functioned like a machine, balanced and interdependent. Yet even here, his tendency toward experimentation created problems. Leonardo used new techniques, searching for better ways to capture light and depth. The results were visually powerful, but unstable. Time would not be kind to these experiments. Again, his desire to understand and improve outweighed concerns for permanence. Milan allowed Leonardo to live closer to his true nature. He was no longer confined to a single identity: painter, engineer, architect, thinker. These roles overlapped freely. The court valued his versatility, even if it did not always understand him. In this city, Leonardo came closest to living as he wished, pursuing ideas wherever they led, unhurried by narrow definitions. Milan did not resolve his restlessness, but it gave it form. Here, the engineer of dreams found a place to build. In Milan, Leonardo's attention turned inward, not toward emotion or philosophy, but toward the human body itself. He had drawn figures for years, studied movement and posture, and observed how muscles shaped the surface of the skin. Yet these observations began to feel incomplete. To truly understand life, Leonardo believed he would have to look beneath appearances. This decision led him into the most private and demanding work of his life. At night, away from the court and the workshop, Leonardo studied the dead. He gained access to hospitals and mortuaries where bodies awaited burial and attention was scarce. These were not acts of spectacle or defiance. They were acts of patience and respect, guided by a need to know. Leonardo approached anatomy as he approached everything else, slowly, methodically, without sensationalism. He did not see the body as an object, but as a system. Muscles became mechanisms of force. Bones revealed themselves as structural supports. Organs formed networks, each dependent on the others. Nothing existed in isolation. His drawings from this period are marked by extraordinary clarity. Layers are peeled back carefully, revealing depth without violence. Tendons, veins, and joints are rendered with precision, yet also with restraint. The body is presented not as something fragile or frightening, but as something intelligently constructed. What fascinated Leonardo most was movement. He studied how muscles contracted and released, how breath altered posture, how the heart functioned as a pump rather than a symbol. Life, he understood, was not a static state. It was motion sustained through balance. These studies transformed his art. Figures gained weight and presence. Limbs carried believable tension. Gestures became purposeful rather than decorative. Even stillness in his paintings suggested the potential for movement. Anatomy gave his work an invisible foundation. Yet Leonardo did not pursue anatomy for art alone. He believed that understanding the body offered insight into the larger mechanics of nature. The same principles that governed muscles and bones, he felt, could be found in rivers, rocks, and machines. The human form became a microcosm of the world. This work came at a cost. The labor was physically demanding and mentally exhausting. The subject matter required emotional distance. Leonardo worked in isolation, often without recognition or immediate reward. Much of what he discovered would remain unpublished during his lifetime. Still, he persisted. Knowledge to him did not require an audience. It required honesty. By mapping the invisible structures that sustained life, Leonardo deepened his understanding of what it meant to observe without illusion. Through anatomy, he learned that beauty was not superficial, it was structural, and in uncovering that structure, he moved one step closer to understanding the quiet order beneath the living world. If Leonardo's body carried him through the world, his notebooks carried his thoughts. They were never meant to be read by others. They were tools, extensions of attention, memory, and curiosity. Wherever Leonardo went, they followed, filling with fragments of a mind that refused to move in straight lines. The pages reveal no clear beginning or end. Observations interrupt drawings. Diagrams collide with reflections. A study of flowing water may sit beside a sketch of a human skull, followed by a note on the behavior of light at dusk. Order in the conventional sense was not his goal. Comprehension was. Leonardo often wrote in mirror script from right to left. Some have seen this as secrecy, others as convenience for a left-handed man. Perhaps it was both, but it also reflected his inward way of thinking. His notes feel less like communication and more like conversation, thoughts speaking to themselves. The notebooks allowed him to return to ideas repeatedly. Nothing was final. A sketch made years earlier could reappear, refined, questioned, expanded. Time did not close his inquiries, it deepened them. In this way, his notebooks resisted the forward rush of life, creating a space where ideas could linger. They also reveal the breadth of his curiosity. Leonardo wrote about painting, but also about clouds, erosion, optics, botany, mechanics, and sound. He examined how water shaped landscapes, how wind moved through valleys, how light fractured when passing through glass. To him, these were not separate subjects. They were variations of the same underlying order. Many entries are written as questions rather than statements. Why does the sky appear blue? How does a bird maintain balance in flight? What determines the expression of a face? Leonardo trusted inquiry more than declaration. Questions kept the mind open. Answers risked closure. Despite their richness, the notebooks were private. Leonardo did not hurry to publish or systematize his discoveries. Knowledge did not feel complete to him unless it remained flexible. Fixed conclusions felt premature. In these pages, Leonardo found freedom. He could think without interruption, explore without judgment, and record the world as he encountered it, complex, layered, and unresolved. The notebooks became a place where his restless mind could rest, even as it continued to move. Long after his voice fell silent, these pages would remain, not as finished theories, but as traces of attention, a second mind, preserved in ink, still watching the world. From his earliest days, Leonardo had watched the sky with quiet fascination. Birds never appeared to him as symbols or metaphors. They were solutions, living demonstrations of balance, structure, and movement. As his understanding of nature deepened, this fascination matured into a sustained inquiry, how something heavier than air could rise, remain aloft, and move with grace. Leonardo studied birds patiently. He observed how wings changed shape in motion, how feathers adjusted to shifts in wind, how bodies tilted and corrected themselves without effort. Flight, he realized, was not forceful, it was responsive. Birds did not conquer the air, they cooperated with it. These observations filled his notebooks. Wings were sketched from multiple angles, mechanisms were proposed, adjusted, discarded, and reconsidered. Leonardo imagined machines powered by human strength, shaped by the same principles he saw in nature. He did not dream of escape, but of understanding. If humans could fly, it would not be through defiance of nature, but through obedience to its laws. The dream of flight revealed something essential about Leonardo's mind. He did not separate imagination from discipline. His designs were bold, yet grounded in careful observation. Each line carried both hope and restraint. Failure did not discourage him, it informed him. Leonardo knew that his flying machines might never leave the ground. He accepted this quietly. The value lay not only in success, but in the clarity gained through pursuit. In studying flight, he refined his understanding of air, weight, balance, and motion, principles that reached far beyond the sky. Flight also represented a gentler vision of human progress. Unlike weapons or fortifications, it offered no obvious path to dominance. It suggested freedom without harm, elevation without destruction. In this sense, Leonardo's dream was moral as much as mechanical. Though centuries would pass before human flight became reality, Leonardo's work stands as a reminder of how innovation begins, not with urgency but with attention, not with conquest but with curiosity. He did not rush toward the sky. He waited, watched, and learned. In imagining flight, Leonardo was not trying to leave the Earth behind. He was trying to understand it more fully, from every possible angle, even those beyond human reach. As Leonardo's reputation expanded, so did the range of those who sought his skills. Dukes, generals, and rulers recognized the value of a mind capable of turning observation into invention. Power, in the Renaissance, was rarely subtle, and Leonardo found himself repeatedly drawn into its orbit. Yet his relationship with authority was always uneasy, marked by distance rather than devotion. At court, war was discussed with the same calm certainty as architecture or finance. Conflict was expected, prepared for, and justified as necessity. Leonardo listened, observed, and responded with designs that were precise and effective. He drafted fortifications, studied angles of defense, and proposed machines capable of altering the balance of battle. His understanding of mechanics made him useful in these contexts, and usefulness ensured patronage. But Leonardo never celebrated these inventions. In his notebooks, the language grows careful when he addresses instruments of destruction. He records function, not glory, efficiency, not triumph. It is as if he were describing natural phenomena rather than human intent. This emotional restraint reveals a deeper truth. Leonardo was interested in how things worked, not in what they were used for. War troubled him, though he rarely stated this directly. He understood violence as a failure of harmony, a rupture in the natural order he so carefully studied. Yet he lived in a world where survival depended on compromise. To remain free to pursue knowledge, he had to serve those who wielded power. This tension shaped much of his adult life. Leonardo moved between courts, offering his intellect while protecting his inner independence. He fulfilled commissions, but he did not bind himself emotionally to their purposes. His loyalty was not to rulers or causes, but to curiosity itself. In contrast to the noise of political ambition, Leonardo's inner world remained quiet. He did not seek influence. He avoided confrontation. Where others argued for dominance, he observed consequences. Power, he saw, was temporary. Nature endured. This moral distance allowed him to navigate dangerous environments without losing himself. He stood close enough to power to learn from it, but far enough to avoid being shaped by it. Few of his contemporaries managed this balance. Leonardo understood something essential about human history. That invention alone does not define progress. Without wisdom, it merely accelerates destruction. His work reflects this awareness. Brilliant, restrained, and often tinged with caution. In a violent age, Leonardo remained inwardly calm. He did not reject the world as it was, but he refused to surrender his values to it. Between war and wonder, he chose to keep watching, quietly measuring the cost of human ambition against the enduring order of nature. Among all of Leonardo's works, there was one he carried with him for years, returning to it again and again as if it were unfinished by nature itself. It was not the largest of his paintings, nor the most dramatic, yet it absorbed more of his attention than any other. The woman in the portrait did not announce her presence. She waited. Leonardo began the painting in Florence, but it followed him through cities and stages of life. While other commissions were delivered and left behind, this one remained close. He adjusted it slowly, patiently, often in silence. Each return brought subtle changes, a softening of shadows, a refinement of posture, a barely perceptible shift in expression. The woman's face resists certainty. Her smile is neither joyful nor distant. It seems to exist in transition, forming and fading at the same time. Leonardo understood that human expression is never fixed. Emotion moves beneath the surface, shaped by memory and thought. To capture a single moment honestly, he believed, was to suggest many moments at once. Light plays a crucial role in the painting. It does not fall harshly or define edges sharply. Instead, it wraps itself around the figure, blending form into atmosphere. Leonardo used this technique not to impress, but to persuade the eye to slow down. The longer one looks, the more the image changes. The background, too, defies expectation. It is not a place that can be easily named. Rivers curve unnaturally. Roads fade into distance without destination. The landscape feels ancient and unfinished, as if still forming. In this setting, the woman becomes less a subject and more a presence, part of a larger, evolving world. Leonardo did not paint her to be admired quickly. He painted her to be encountered repeatedly. The portrait offers no clear narrative. It does not explain who she is or what she feels. Instead, it invites reflection. Each viewer brings their own interpretation, completing the image through attention. For Leonardo, this painting represented something deeper than portraiture. It was an experiment in perception itself. How little could be shown, and how much still be felt? How could ambiguity create intimacy rather than distance? The woman became a world because she contained time within her stillness. She held movement within calm. In her quiet presence, Leonardo achieved what he had sought throughout his life, a moment where observation, emotion, and mystery existed in perfect balance. He never truly finished the painting. Perhaps he never intended to. Some works are meant not to be completed, but to remain open, alive to every gaze that meets them. As Leonardo grew older, recognition followed him wherever he went. His name carried meaning now. Patrons spoke of him with reverence. Artists studied his work with admiration. Courts competed quietly for his presence. Fame, which arrives gradually, often goes unnoticed until it becomes heavy. To the world, Leonardo appeared successful. He had served powerful rulers, created works unlike any other, and earned a reputation that crossed borders. Yet this recognition did not bring him the sense of completion others might have expected. Praise could not resolve the questions that still occupied his mind. Fame altered the rhythm of his life. Expectations grew louder, requests multiplied. Patrons wanted certainty, delivery, and proof of genius. Leonardo offered thoughtfulness, delay, and exploration. The gap between what others wanted and what he needed widened. He was admired not only for what he had done, but for what people believed he could still do. This possibility became a burden. Each new commission carried the weight of anticipation. Every pause was interpreted as failure to fulfill promise. The freedom that curiosity required became increasingly difficult to protect. Leonardo responded not with resistance, but with withdrawal. He moved more often. He accepted fewer obligations. He surrounded himself with trusted companions and students rather than crowds. Solitude, once natural, became intentional. Despite his reputation, Leonardo remained unsatisfied. He saw his own work more clearly than anyone else. Where others saw mastery, he saw compromise. Where others saw completion, he saw what might have been refined further. Fame did not soften his self-criticism, it sharpened it. Yet recognition also brought him protection. It allowed him to pursue ideas without constant justification. Fame created a shield, even as it weighed him down. Within this contradiction, Leonardo continued to work, quietly, deliberately, often unseen. He learned that fame does not settle the mind. It amplifies what already exists. In Leonardo's case, it deepened his restlessness. The world celebrated him as a finished genius, while he experienced himself as permanently unfinished. The weight of fame did not crush him, but it bent his path. He learned to carry it carefully, never allowing it to define the direction of his thought. What mattered most remained unchanged. The slow, patient search for understanding, conducted far from applause. Leonardo spent much of his later life in motion. Cities changed, courts rose and fell, patrons gained power and lost it again. Through all of this, he moved quietly from place to place, carrying his notebooks, his tools, and a small circle of trusted companions. Home, in the traditional sense, became less important to him than continuity of thought. He had lived in Florence, Milan, Rome, and beyond, yet no city ever fully contained him. Each offered opportunity, and each imposed limits. Leonardo accepted invitations without attachment, understanding that permanence was an illusion in a world shaped by politics and ambition. Movement became a form of protection. Travel did not exhaust him. It clarified him. New landscapes renewed his attention. Different light altered his perception. Rivers, mountains, and architecture presented variations on familiar patterns. Even repetition, he learned, could reveal difference when observed closely. His wandering also reflected a deeper restlessness. Leonardo was not searching for recognition or comfort. He was searching for conditions that allowed thought to breathe. Whenever expectation grew too rigid, he stepped away. Distance restored balance. Despite his movement, Leonardo was never truly alone. Students and assistants followed him, learning not through instruction, but through proximity. He taught by example, demonstrating how to look, how to question, how to remain patient with uncertainty. Knowledge, in his presence, unfolded quietly, yet there was a cost to this life. Projects remained unfinished, relationships stayed temporary, stability was always deferred. Leonardo accepted this without regret. He understood that his nature did not align with settled routines. To stop moving would have meant to stop observing. In wandering, he preserved his independence. He remained open to change, responsive to circumstance, and free from rigid identity. Painter, engineer, thinker. These roles shifted with context. None defined him completely. Leonardo's life did not follow a straight line. It traced a series of gentle arcs, shaped by curiosity rather than destination. The wanderer without a home had learned something essential, that belonging did not require place, only attention. And so he continued, not toward arrival, but toward understanding, wherever it might briefly allow him to pause. In the final years of his life, Leonardo crossed the Alps and entered France at the invitation of King Francis I. It was not an escape, but a quiet transition. The urgency that had once shaped his movements began to fade, replaced by a slower rhythm that suited him well. Here, he was no longer expected to prove himself. He was received with respect, even affection. Leonardo settled near the Loire, in a residence provided by the king. The landscape was gentle, marked by water, gardens, and open sky. Time seemed to move differently here. Days unfolded without pressure. Conversations replaced demands. Observation returned to its earliest, simplest form. Francis I admired Leonardo not only for his work, but for his way of thinking. He treated him less as a servant and more as a companion. This rare relationship allowed Leonardo to speak freely, to reflect without defensiveness. For the first time in many years, he did not need to justify delay or incompletion. Though his body weakened, his mind remained active. His right hand, once tireless, could no longer draw as it had. Yet he continued to think, to speak, to guide. Ideas flowed through conversation rather than ink. Wisdom replaced productivity. Leonardo spent long hours reflecting on what he had learned. He considered the limits of knowledge, the cost of ambition, the beauty of restraint. The world no longer felt something to be pursued, but something to be quietly understood. He reviewed his notebooks, not with urgency, but with acceptance. What remained unfinished no longer troubled him. Incompleteness had always been part of his way of knowing. Now it felt natural, even appropriate. In France, time softened. It loosened its grip. Leonardo no longer raced against it. He allowed days to pass without measurement. Observation became contemplative rather than investigative. The man who had once filled pages with restless inquiry now found peace in stillness. The search had not ended, but it had slowed, settling into a gentle awareness that understanding does not require possession. Here, at the edge of life, Leonardo finally allowed time to move without him. As the days grew quieter, Leonardo's thoughts turned inward. His life had been filled with motion, of cities, ideas, and questions. But now there was space to reflect without urgency. The world no longer pressed itself upon him. It waited, as he once had. Leonardo understood that knowledge was not something one could gather and hold. It shifted with perspective. What had once seemed certain now appeared provisional. The more deeply he had studied nature, the more he recognized its refusal to be mastered. Understanding, he realized, was a form of humility. He thought often about beginnings and endings. His work had always resisted closure, and now he saw why. Life itself was unfinished. Every conclusion opened into something else. To demand final answers was to misunderstand the nature of inquiry. Memory softened with time. Achievements lost their sharpness. What remained were moments of attention, watching water move, observing a face-change expression, tracing the flight of a bird. These were the true constants of his life. Leonardo did not regret what he had left incomplete. Regret would have required certainty that things could have been otherwise. He had followed his nature faithfully. Curiosity had guided him more reliably than ambition ever could. As dusk approached each evening, light faded gently, revealing the world in softer tones. Leonardo noticed this still. Even in weakness, his attention remained intact. The habit of looking never left him. He sensed that his role had never been to arrive at answers, but to remain receptive to questions. In this understanding, there was peace. A mind at dusk does not resist the coming night. It observes it. Leonardo's life had been a long act of seeing. Now, as silence gathered, he allowed that act to conclude, not with certainty, but with acceptance. Leonardo da Vinci died in the spring of 1519, far from the hills where his life had begun. There were no great declarations, no final revelations. His passing came softly, as much of his life had unfolded, without spectacle, without insistence. The world did not pause, but something within it became still. Those who were with him described a calm departure. His breath slowed. His attention, which had once reached endlessly outward, turned inward one final time. There was no struggle against the inevitable. Death to Leonardo was not an interruption, but a continuation of nature's order. He left behind drawings, notebooks, unfinished paintings, and ideas that had never fully taken shape. To some, this appeared as loss, evidence of what might have been completed. But this interpretation misunderstands the life he lived. Leonardo had never worked toward closure. His legacy was not in conclusions, but in inquiry. In death, as in life, he resisted containment. His ideas scattered, traveling beyond him, influencing artists, thinkers, and inventors centuries later. The questions he asked continued to breathe through time. Leonardo's restlessness did not vanish, it transformed. His unfinished thoughts invited others to look more closely, to question assumptions, to approach the world with patience rather than certainty. In this way, his work remained alive. There was no single moment that defined his end, no final masterpiece, only a life gradually yielding to stillness. The observer had become part of what he observed. Leonardo did not leave the world resolved. He left it open. When Leonardo da Vinci was gone, the world he left behind continued as it always had. Cities rose and fell, wars were fought, new names replaced old ones. Yet beneath this movement, something quieter endured, a way of seeing that did not belong to any single time. Leonardo's legacy cannot be reduced to paintings, machines, or notebooks, though these remain remarkable. What truly survived him was an attitude toward the world. He approached reality not as something to dominate, but as something to listen to. He believed that careful attention was a form of respect, and that understanding began where certainty ended. Centuries later, people would try to categorize him: artist, scientist, engineer, visionary. None of these titles fully contain him. Leonardo lived before such boundaries had hardened, and he resisted them instinctively. To him, knowledge was unified. Art informed science. Observation informed imagination. Beauty and function were never separate. His unfinished works became part of this legacy. They remind us that value does not depend on completion. In a culture obsessed with results, Leonardo's life suggests another measure: depth of inquiry. He showed that lingering with a question can be more meaningful than rushing toward an answer. The notebooks he left behind feel less like records and more like invitations. They do not instruct. They provoke. They encourage the reader to slow down, to notice patterns, to look again at what seems familiar. Even now, they reward patience rather than speed. Leonardo's influence persists not because he predicted the future, but because he modeled a way of engaging with the present. He taught that curiosity need not be loud, that intelligence need not be aggressive, that progress does not require conquest. Perhaps most importantly, he demonstrated that wonder is not childish. It is disciplined. It requires humility, attention, and time. Leonardo never lost this capacity for wonder, even as his knowledge grew vast. As the light fades on his life, what remains is not a monument, but a presence, a reminder that the world reveals itself slowly to those willing to watch. That meaning is not seized, but noticed. Leonardo da Vinci did not give humanity answers to everything. He offered something quieter and more enduring, permission to look closely, to remain curious, and to accept that understanding is a lifelong act. And in that gentle attention, his voice continues long after the light has gone.